would like to start by welcoming you all to this first edition of the Aswan Forum Youth Dialogue. My name is Ahmed Abdel Latif. I am the Executive Director of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development and the Director General of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peace Building. I'd like to start by saying a few words to introduce the forum and the youth dialogue today. The Aswan Forum is a high-level platform which aims to strengthen the interlinkages between sustainable peace and sustainable development in Africa. It was launched in 2019 by His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in the context of Egypt chairing the African Union. The first edition was held in December 2019 in the city of Aswan and was attended by a number of heads of states and leaders from government, private sector, civil society, as well as research institutions, with more than 500 participants from 70 countries. The first edition laid down an ambitious agenda to harness Africa's great wealth and potential. It emphasized the need for Africa to undertake a paradigm shift from crisis management and short-term solutions to sustainable peace and development, while addressing the root causes of conflict through long-term peace building. And this with the ultimate goal to meet the goals of the African Union 2063 Agenda and the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda. Since that first edition, COVID-19 has brought far-reaching effects on countries across the world and unprecedented challenges, in particular for Africa. While African leaders took early on proactive measures to mitigate the health impact of the pandemic, however, the pandemic quickly unraveled from a health crisis into a full-blown socio-economic crisis, which we are still grappling with. In this context, Egypt is convening virtually the second edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development, titled Shaping Africa's New Normal, Recovering Stronger, Rebuilding Better, to advance a positive and ambitious agenda through decisive leadership and innovative solutions, as Africa charters its pathway for recovery post-COVID-19. This agenda is anchored in a prevention and resilience paradigm as the foundation for a stronger and sustainable recovery. To achieve these objectives, youth have a key role. Building on the first Aswan Forum, we would want to further strengthen the youth voices in the context of the forum. And we are doing this in two ways. First, by having a number of youth representatives participate in the different sessions of the forum. And second, we also wanted to have a dedicated discussion ahead of the forum with youth leaders to ensure that their voices are heard and expectations are met in advance of the forum, to feed into its discussion and contribute to the action-oriented agenda it seeks to put forward. I will conclude by quoting the declaration adopted by the United Nations at its 75th anniversary. Youth, it states, is the missing piece for peace and development. We want to make sure at the Aswan Forum that this piece is an integral part of our deliberations. Last but not least, I would like to thank Twitter for being the partner of this youth dialogue. We could not have wished for a more suitable partner. Thank you all once again for being on board. I would like to hand over to our moderator, Soraya Bahgat, who has kindly accepted our invitation to moderate this dialogue. Soraya is a renowned advocate for women's issues, but more importantly, she's also passionate about the public good, as we in the Aswan Forum Secretariat are passionate about sustainable peace and development in Africa, and also firm believers in the importance of translating ideas into actions on the ground. Thank you, Soraya, for lending your energy and talent to steer our discussions forward.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdel Latif. Thank you, the Aswan Forum, and thank you to the young African leaders who are joining us today, and thank you, Twitter. I would like to say, Masa el Khair, good afternoon, bon après-midi, muchana mwema. As the ambassador has said, COVID has placed several challenges on our continent. The Aswan Forum this year is focused on shaping Africa's new normal and recovering stronger and rebuilding better. As the ambassador has said, we can only do so with active participation from all stakeholders, including our youth. I'd like to thank you all, not just for joining, but also for making myself as an African and so many millions of Africans proud with your leadership. Each and every one of you has embraced a calling and made their voice heard in one of the important thematic areas that will be discussed during the forum. I'd like to thank you for setting an example for so many, and it's very important that we share your experiences with others. Because as much as we have been challenged by this pandemic, we can also draw on strength from our diversity and our commitment to finding shared solutions to move our continent further towards prosperity, recovery, and resilience. You set the example and also reaffirm that African youth can and will. I'd like to start first, because the pandemic has, placed this issue center stage. I'd like to start with a discussion on health. As it has taken over the global agenda, forcing a paradigm shift upon us, COVID-19 has forced us to adapt to the new normal. We start with Levi Singh, who works on the Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights Africa Trust as Regional Youth and Policy Advisor. Levi is also a former Secretary General of the African Youth and Adolescent Network on Population and Development, AFRIAN. He brings extensive experience working on systems for the meaningful engagement, participation, and leadership of young people in health policy and the promotion of gender equality in the global health sphere. These are themes that are going to be covered during the forum this year. Levi, let me first start by asking you, how has the pandemic affected you personally? And how has it affected your advocacy work? And from your experience promoting the meaningful participation of youth in health policy, how can African youth become more engaged to concretely mitigate the effects of COVID on our continent? What would you like to share with your fellow young Africans and the relevant session at the forum? Over to you, Levi.
Thank you, Soraya, and greetings to His Excellency and to the fellow distinguished panelists who are joining on this inaugural session. So to answer your question, Soraya, the pandemic has dramatically affected our work in many ways. From movement restrictions due to lockdowns to restrictions on meetings and gatherings, we've seen the space for civic engagement close as a result of this health crisis. The initial rush to move everything to the virtual world too was a challenge for us, as the digital divide across the continent is largely inescapable, with high data costs, poor connectivity, and less than desirable coverage characterizing our region. So this wasn't an immediate switch over for us when it comes to how we undertake our advocacy and our work as youth-led and youth-serving organizations. Nevertheless, we've seen great resilience, grit, and enthusiasm displayed by many youth-led and serving organizations working in the health and well-being space. Young people taking to social media platforms to encourage adherence to non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as hand hygiene, physical distancing, cough etiquette, and mask wearing to prevent the spread of the virus. Young professionals and experts have also played an important role here in countering what can be termed as the infodemic. So young professionals and experts have countered fake news and disinformation on aspects of the virus, such as it being transmitted by 5G internet connectivity, even though we know that more people in New York City have access to 5G internet than the whole of the African continent combined, yet we still have COVID-19 here. To masks not being effective in preventing the spread of COVID-19, and a host of other strange and at times humorous conspiracy theories. Young activists and provincials alike have also played a pivotal role in supporting fellow youth to navigate the overwhelming sense of loss, anxiety, uncertainty, and isolation brought about by the abrupt school and university closures, job losses, public movement restrictions, and the loss of family and community members to the virus, as well as other occurrences we've all experienced collectively over the last year. By creating room for candid yet useful conversations on mental health, self-care, destigmatization, and offering support and solidarity and a sense of community during this time of profound uncertainty. Young advocates and activists have also played a role in advocating for the continuation of essential health services during this pandemic, lobbying right up to the level of the African Union Commission, as well as other sub-regional economic and political bodies, to ensure that access to essential life-saving health services and commodities such as HIV testing and treatment, family planning and modern contraceptive methods are not restricted, and that this pandemic does not result in further unnecessary illness or loss of life from preventable causes among fellow young people. But to answer your question, in terms of what we should be focusing on as young people and as the collective development community, as we aspire to build back better in line with the theme of the dialogue and the forum. In my view, we can't speak honestly about a robust, equitable, and sustainable African recovery and rebuilding when we are losing large portions of our future workforce to morbidity and premature mortality as a result of preventable disease such as AIDS, which remains the leading cause of death of all African youth across the continent in 2021. We also can't speak honestly about a sustainable African recovery when prior to COVID-19 and its onset onto the African continent, 33 out of 55 African member states were spending more money on servicing debt than they were investing in their national public health systems, infrastructure, and workforce, according to the IMF and the Jubilee Debt Campaign. As African populations continue to grow and as the continent continues to rapidly urbanize, we need African leaders to put their money where their mouth is and invest in building responsive, resilient, and equitable systems for health. And these systems for health need to respond to the current high burden of communicable diseases, which the young people of Africa are currently faced with, but also needs to be able to adapt and mitigate the risk posed by the rising tide of non-communicable diseases, as well as other threats posed by climate-induced disasters such as cyclones, floods, and droughts, which go on to disproportionately affect children, women, and the elderly. I've said a lot, but you may ask, where is the money going to come from to fund this ambition and these responsive and resilient systems for health? You may be wondering. Well, according to much of the research, Africa loses an estimated $90 billion, or 3.7% rather, of its cumulative GDP year on year to illicit financial flows, to corruption and maladministration. So we really do have a place to start by taking a firm stance against corruption and maladministration in all its forms everywhere.
And how do you see the youth contributing? I mean, you've shared a great example of young people ensuring that there was continued access to needed medication and healthcare services. Could you perhaps maybe share a little bit more? Because I think we want to use this opportunity to inspire so many of the young people who are watching us today that they can also find a role, no matter how small, to make a contribution.
Yeah, thanks, Soraya. I was getting to that. So part of what we have an opportunity to do now is we have an opportunity to revisit our social contracts. We have an opportunity to be guided by Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals, which are currently all off track, to revitalize conversations around meaningful youth participation, engagement, and leadership when it comes to determining health policy and programming within countries. So this is more about ensuring that young people not only have a seat at the table, but they have a voice and visibility in order to influence how public policy, when it comes to health, and how public programs are crafted to benefit not just our generation, but the generation that will also precede us.
Thank you so much, Levi, and we will get back to these important points. I'm actually really glad that you shared from the get-go the sense of anxiety and isolation that so many of us across the continent, have been going, and all over the world have been dealing with since the onset of the pandemic. I'd like to share that I share the grief of many Africans who might have lost someone to COVID. I personally am a COVID survivor. I've lost a family member, but I also was able to draw on connections, because technology, and I think you referred to that, technology has enabled us, despite the sense of isolation that we're feeling right now, to find linkages and connect. And in my personal grief, I was able to draw upon so many friends across the continent who have reached out and made us stronger. And I'm glad that we are going to be focusing on the important point of finding the avenues to empower and enable our young people to effectively contribute. So I will get back to that, and I'll also get back to your personal commitment towards equality in the health force. But for now, I'd like to move on to further build on Levi's point about entrepreneurship and social innovation and finding avenues for young people to participate. So I'll move on to Luther DJK, because last year's forum concluded, as the ambassador mentioned, with the strong message that we need a paradigm shift from crisis management to a focus on sustainable peace and development. Among many other themes that are going to be discussed during the forum, we will highlight Africa's resilience through opportunities created by its people's talent, as evidenced by the young leaders that are joining us today, who have displayed exceptional determination and engagement. One of the sessions during the forum will be dedicated to discussing sustainable peace and development through arts, culture, and heritage. Another session will discuss economic recovery and opportunities through structural transformation in the fields of energy, digitization, and how to utilize entrepreneurship to progress closer towards the fulfillment of Africa's true potential. A common thread weaving through the forum is the importance of innovation in promoting recovery and resilience in Africa. Luther DJK is the director of iCampus, which is Liberia's first shared innovation, co-working, and community space for organizations and individuals focusing on the intersection of technology, which Levi referred to, accountability, and social change in Liberia. He sets a model for us all across Africa and brings 10 years of experience in the information, communication, technologies for development sector, and is an alumnus of both the Obama Foundation Leaders Africa Program and U.S. State Department's President Obama Emerging Global Leaders Initiative. Luther, thank you for joining us today. Let me first start by asking you, how has COVID affected you personally? And can you also share not only how it has affected the users of your co-working space, but also, more importantly, how some of them are leveraging technology and entrepreneurship to overcome the challenges posed by the pandemic. As someone at this important intersection of technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, which is covered by the forum, how do you see the contribution of youth in creating innovative projects to support the recovery and advancement of our continent? Luther, over to you.
Thank you very much, Soraya, and the Aswan Forum team. It's a pleasure to always share what we've learned and what we are learning continuously. So iCampus, like Soraya said, is Liberia's first innovation co-working space. Set up back in 2016, but we officially launched to the public in 2018, July. And in the last couple of years, we've had about 10,000 people come through our spaces for different events, trainings, networking, and so forth. We've hosted about 200 plus events here as well. Significant progress has been made in the past 10 years to address, some of these difficult political, economic, and governance issues in Liberia. After the 14 years of civil crisis, when the country was rebuilding, then we got the Ebola crisis back in 2014 that took us through 2016. And the young people in Liberia now well constitute over 60% of the population. And these young people have incredible energy, but oftentimes they feel disenfranchised and excluded from the ideas and opportunities that are there. And there are few active managed spaces anywhere in the country where youth can come together to collaborate, to innovate, to access high-speed internet, and to develop shared ideas to solve collective challenges that we have here. And it is essential that the young citizens have the skills, the tools, and communities they need to leverage change and build the Liberia they would like to see, and also build the Africa they would like to see as well. And that's why we set up the iCampus. And some of the cool things we work on here, just a quick background before I go to the question, is, we create a shared space for organizations, like Soraya said, focusing on the intersection of technology, accountability, and social change to really come and utilize these resources to thrive. So it serves as a networking and innovation hub, and also a focal point for women groups, minority groups, and digital change makers. And we focus on key things that includes knowledge, community, ecosystem, and also collaboration. And lastly, sustainability in terms of really, revenue streams, how young people can develop long-term solutions that will thrive beyond the normal donor fundings and all of that. But coming to your question, the pandemic. In March last year, it was we recorded our first case on March 16 last year, which was a government official that just returned from Switzerland from a conference, and then that was the first case, and then it started growing rapidly, and right the end of March, the government issued state of emergency, lockdown. 3 p.m. there was no movement, and they put a hold on gathering and all of that. So due to that, we had to take immediate steps to make sure that we don't create an environment where people will get infected. The safety of our staff and our community members and all of that. Because on a daily basis, we have about 60 to 70 persons in the space who are working, doing different things. But when we have typical events, like in all of our spaces, we have about 200 people in the space. So looking at that, we had to take immediate steps. We had to temporarily shut down the campus, which was really, really hard to do, but because of the safety of our staff and also our team members and all of the community members, we also had to take immediate steps. Most of our grants and programs that we're working with from USAID and other donors were temporarily suspended or postponed. Some of the grants that were in the works as well. So that greatly affected everything we were doing, including the revenue streams of the campus includes, we rent out some of the office spaces to different organizations. So we have about 11 organizations in the space. We also rent out the shared spaces for people to host conference, trainings, and events. We have a studio that we usually produce music, jingle, podcasts for journalists, musicians. We also have a cafe, which is an inclusion cafe that is run by people with disabilities. So all of that.
Have your beneficiaries found ways to actually adapt, use technology? Because, you'd think that being at the intersection of that entrepreneurship and technology sphere, that they would find ways to move beyond the pandemic and its effects. Because, you look very optimistic, so I have a feeling that you're about to give us a lot of hope in that area.
I know. Thank you for that. Yes. So to a larger extent, we worked with our community members. The first steps we took was most of our engagement and meetings and events, we had to move it online. That was some of the first thing we did because we have a good internet connection on campus. So most of the engagement, we had 3 persons instead of convening like 60 persons to an event. Now we have like 3 persons moderating, and most of it was online. So that was the first step. Most of our entrepreneurs that are in our space, we had to work with them to mentor them to also adapt online, which was difficult. So some of our entrepreneurs who were working on everything from what we call the coronavirus crisis response hub, most of them started working with us to, whether it's SMS, disseminating information to citizens, whether it's digital marketing. For example, some of our members who were physically handing out goods and products from their farms or from their little kind of online marketing, now They had to do it digitally, so they adapted and they had to deliver these products to people doorsteps and all of that because there was lockdown. We worked with them to get some passes where they could pass through security checkpoints and all of that, which was difficult.
So you've shown that, you know, with determination and mentoring, we can adapt to what we're calling now the new normal, correct? Because innovation is such an important theme of the forum, I will be getting back to you because I think we need to also discuss how we can further empower youth to, you know, embrace entrepreneurship and, you know, use innovation to address some of the issues. But I'd also just like to briefly, before going back to you, I'd like to discuss the effects of the pandemic on environment, because, you know, unfortunately, the pandemic has exacerbated some of the challenges that some of us in the continent have been experiencing as a result of climate change. And it unfortunately has undermined the livelihood of millions of our fellow Africans. In response to the growing recognition of these devastating impacts, African governments and regional organizations and civil society have taken positive steps towards addressing the development and security implications of climate threats. And we have seen so many of our fellow young African leaders actually speak up. One of them is Elizabeth Wathuti, who has been recognized all over the world for her climate activism. She's a passionate activist who, among many other achievements, has founded the Green Generation Initiative and serves as head of campaigns and Daima Coalition for Green Spaces Protection at the Wangari Maathai Foundation. And she's a full member as well of the Greenbelt movement. In 2019, she received the Diana Award, as well as an award from the Great Climate Fund for going above and beyond in her daily life to create and sustain positive change, and has also been recognized by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And she's also won, as a finalist, the 2020 Commonwealth Youth Awards for Africa. So many achievements, so many recognitions. I'd like to dive straight into it. Elizabeth, how has COVID personally affected you, and how has it affected your advocacy work in the field of climate change? I'd also like you to please share with us how you think COVID has exacerbated some of the challenges our continent faces as a result of climate change, and whether you see any climate action that you propose to mitigate these effects and strengthen the resilience of our continent. Because our forum's main topic is about moving forward with recovery and resilience, let us focus on how you think we can utilize this opportunity to further the climate agenda on the continent. Elizabeth, back to you.
Thank you so much, and it's really a great honor to be speaking in this forum. As a person who has been focused on environmental conservation, I would say COVID has greatly affected me and actually negatively impacted my work as well in advocacy, because I work a lot with schools, and my focus is to create a generation of young people who are conscious of the environment at a young age. And of course, this is inspired by the fact that I got to have the love for nature and passion to want to be part of conservation at a young age, having grown up in the most forested county in Kenya and in the Central Highlands, where a lot of people were really focused on conservation, and in a place where I could directly connect to nature. So when COVID happened, the schools were shut down for a whole year, which meant that we had to stop most of our programs in schools. And our programs revolve around restoration, and there's also the aspect of practical environmental education, and we also focus on greening schools in a way to let people know that you don't have to come from a place that possibly is like the most forested, or a place that is like the Central Highlands, for example, like I mentioned in Kenya, for you to be on the forefront to conserve the environment. You can be in the cities, and even in the urban areas, and wherever anyone is coming from can still be part and parcel of conservation. And that is why we try to green schools, so that even in the schools that are in the cities where they don't have space, for example, to plant tree seedlings, we teach the children what they can do to beautify their school compound in the small space that they have. And by this, it teaches everyone around the world that you can be part of the solution from wherever you are. And of course, the situation now with COVID, there has been a lot of negative things, of course, with youths also being greatly impacted with, the aspect of unemployment, and also the fact that the most vulnerable communities have to deal with two crises at the same time. They have to deal with COVID, and at the same time, the climate crisis is still affecting them. Because even in the middle of a pandemic, we still have impacts of the climate crisis, ranging from the unpredictable weather patterns, for example, and this has really caused flooding situations. And I remember when the COVID situation began to have less numbers in my country, the schools were reopened. And at the time when the schools were reopened, there are schools in several parts of my country that could not be reopened because the schools were flooded and the children had to be moved to other schools. And that is just one of the aspects. And we have the challenges also with desert locust invasions. And these are challenges that really show the fact that even in the middle of a pandemic, people are still being affected by the climate crisis. And I think the big question to ask is, where exactly is the problem? And for me, I believe it's because we have greatly disrupted the human ecological balance. And it's really evident that the damage we've continued to do to our planet is directly impacting us, our well-being, our human health, and even the road towards a sustainable future.
And how can youth contribute to mitigating some of these effects? And how would you encourage some of the youth who are watching you right now and who are inspired like me by your many achievements and your passion? What message would you give them? How can you get them engaged in climate activism?
Great. I think to begin with, I know that young people have really stepped up to the challenge and are speaking up, they're voicing out and speaking to kind of say the kind of future that they want to see. And of course, we all want to have a livable world. And without that livable world, there's going to be no safe future for us all. And I know we believe that we definitely deserve better in terms of how the planet is and in terms of the different actions that are being taken around. So I believe every young person needs to stay informed and never be afraid to voice out, because this is our future. And definitely, if we don't make changes right now to the way in which things are being done around the planet, then it means that we risk having the kind of future that we all want to see. I always envision a kind of future where we will put people and the planet above profits, and a kind of future where the future generations will not have to bear the price of the consequences of the actions of previous generations. So, and this is only going to be made possible if everyone out there is mindful of how they're going to leave this planet for generations to come. And I think young people have a great role to play, number one, in holding their leaders accountable, because we have so many pledges, commitments, and promises being made in terms of what nations want to do in terms of addressing the climate crisis. For instance, we have seen what has happened with COVID. Our response to COVID-19 pandemic has taught us key lessons towards fighting the climate crisis. And of course, we must accelerate actions for a sustainable future. And we need the young people on board. We need their voices, and not just their voices, but we need to listen to them and then act upon the demands from the young people. And I think by that, it's going to be easier for us to achieve that sustainable future. So I believe we need to really support the young people. And the other thing we need to really focus on right now is to support the vulnerable populations to adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis. And of course, the young people still fall in this category, because the children, at the end of the day, remain the most affected by this crisis.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is such an important message, because that is, the focus of today's dialogue, and it's going to be an important theme throughout the forum. I see that you echo so much that has already been said by Levi and Luther. I see the themes of the importance of youth having a role, and I see that, Luther has also said that we can all be, part and parcel of this. We all, each and everyone has a role, and I think when it comes to climate, each and everyone has a role to, lessen the environmental impact or footprint that we leave behind. And I see an overreaching theme of collaboration. And to that effect, I will get back to you, Elizabeth, because I still want to build on that important discussion and talk a bit more about some of the ideas that you have to mitigate the effects and promote the resilience of our continent when it comes to climate action. But for now, to build on the theme of collaboration, I'd like to move on to Cassie Martin Ekomuswanyet, because as the pandemic continues to challenge our continent, a growing number of African youth like yourselves are helping mitigate the impact of the pandemic on African economies and societies. And as we've heard already from three of you, you guys, as African youth, are using technology, social mobilization,
and just a commitment to making a difference, to create these homegrown solutions and innovations and to make your voices heard.
And that reaffirms what we have been saying, that African youth have a key and important role to play in the recovery and resilience of our continent. To that effect, and to shed light on the importance of youth within the peace and security agenda, which is a cornerstone of the Aswan Forum, we're joined by Cassie Martine Ikomo-Soignette, who's a member of the UN Advisory Board on Youth, Peace and Security. She brings 10 years of experience in the field of development and research on issues of peace and security, and is also a community leader and founder of Euro, which works on the effective participation of young people in the peace and recovery process in the Central African Republic. And she's contributed to the development of the country's first national strategy for the prevention of radicalization and violent extremism, which are also themes which will be discussed during one of the sessions at the forum. I have to start, Cassie, by first asking you, what inspired and empowered you to become an expert on youth, peace and security? And from your perspective, what role do youth and young people play in peace building? How has the peace and sustainability agenda been affected by the pandemic? And more importantly, because we're focusing on recovering and being more resilient, how can our youth contribute to concrete initiatives that promote Africa's recovery and resilience? Cassie, it's on to you.
Thank you so much, Soraya. Thank you for your question. Good morning, everyone. Good morning from Central African Republic. It's my pleasure to join you today. And I think that, I will build on what Elizabeth said. She mentioned something that really touched me. The fact that in Africa, like, we are working together to build the future that we all want to see. And I think it's key on the why I decide to start working on new peace and security agenda. Is because I dream my country in a way it was impossible for me to see its future without young people involved. Young people represent over 70% of the population in Central African Republic, and so try to imagine that how is it possible to build a country, a future for this country without that 70%? For me, just the number strikes me a few years ago. And I realized also that we are struggling with prejudices, social and cultural barriers that really, block young people to play an important role in peace building. You may know in Central African Republic, we face something like 9 conflicts. I'm 30 years old, and the reality is that all my life, I live in crisis. I live in conflict, and it was just impossible, to say that I don't have a role to play. And then I realized that I'm not alone, playing that role. There was a lot of young people around Central African Republic, in the country, even refugees, but also in the diaspora, involved, to really try to find a solution, to build peace. And I think it's something that happened in the different countries of Africa. And so, on your question, the impact of the COVID-19, on young people and their contribution to peace building, I think that COVID-19 really, reinforced the vulnerability of young people in the work that they do on the field. Because as I think my fellows just mentioned, they closed the school. There was restriction, people was not free to walk or to walk around the city and so our job, young peace builder, is really based on the fact that we are struggling, not struggling, but we are mobile. I mean that it's difficult for it to build peace if we stay just in one place. And if we don't have that opportunity, for instance, in Central African Republic, maybe it's a Levy which mentioned that using new technologies to really play our role. So even though COVID was there, we tried to develop new strategies. Really use what we have with us in the country. So using SMS messages, using in our culture we have these traditional things when it's I don't know what you call it in English, but it's something that we use to shout in communities and, giving messages. So even though young people,
slogans or what? Slogans?
yeah, not slogans, but it's like an apparel that you use and you speak in it. I don't remember the name in English. But like, even though we was at home, we really used that thing like to really spread messages of, to sensitize people on COVID-19, but also on the importance that we have to be strong, even though the context of pandemic is really making our work as peace builder difficult.
I guess you already had that experience from, recovering from conflict. I guess you were kind of prepared to take on the pandemic, I assume, having, worked on moving forward before.
Yes, I mean, I would say that, we have this capacity, and I think it's a capacity that when you come from a country in war, you develop. I don't know how it is, how it's possible, but it's happened. It's like that capacity of resilience. We know how to deal with situation when things get difficult, and it's exactly what's happened to us in Central African Republic, even during the pandemic. Like, we really use what war teaches, like how we can be connected with our communities, like by using what we have, in our hands, even though it was like stuck in our house.
Well, thank you so much for amplifying, one of the key themes this year, which is resilience. And thank you for giving an example of, tackling resilience not only through this pandemic, but previously through peace building following conflict. I see again the same theme of collaboration and that everyone has a role to play, but also that, we can, I love this quote, we can form the Africa that we dream of or that we envision. And I'd like that you also were talking about the microphone, I guess, or the amplifying voices. And to that effect, that brings me to our partners in this session, Twitter, who is as you all know, is a platform to amplify voices. So I have the great honor of introducing a young leader at Twitter. Jawahir Abdelhamid is a senior public policy associate. And in that capacity, she builds frontline support that elevates Twitter's public policy amongst key audiences, from policymakers to regulatory authorities, and also government agencies, but more importantly, the young people who are using the platform to make their voices heard and share the great work that they're doing across the continent. So, and she also tackles very important areas that are important to Twitter, such as online safety, freedom of speech, privacy, and misinformation. And I'd like to start with you, Jawahir, by asking a very basic question. What does a public policy senior specialist at Twitter do exactly? And why do we need a public policy at Twitter? I mean, some people just think it's a platform where we share, tweets. Is there a public policy behind Twitter? And how have you personally and professionally adapted to the pandemic? And one last question, how do you think we can amplify more African voices on the platform?
Of course, sure. Thank you so much, Suraya. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today. I'd also like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Abdel Latif, and thank you to our fellow panelists for their very interesting input so far. We are really, really proud to be partnering with the Aswan Forum to participate in such conversations around shaping Africa's new normal post-COVID-19. And just to begin on an interesting point, there are really a lot of overlaps between our work and the forum's efforts in building bridges for youth to contribute in rebuilding of societies and in rebuilding of Africa, which is really what is the core of this partnership and what makes it very dear to our hearts. So thank you again for having us, and we really appreciate this opportunity. At Twitter, we of course have seen so many examples of young people leading impactful movements in Africa and around the world. So we've already seen the success that youth can achieve in leading movements on the platform, whether they may be around climate change, around women's rights, around social justice. The platform has really empowered them to have a voice on the issues that matter the most to them, which is why it has of course become a priority to us at Twitter to better understand how we can support young people's voices and youth communities. And in order for us to do that, we have, of course, worked very closely with trusted partners in order for us to consult with them on the opinions of youth across the globe and in Africa in particular as well, to bring in more input and feedback on what the topics that matter the most to them are and how we as a company, as a service and as a global platform can contribute to that. And not just contribute by investing in those topics, but also by better catering our priorities, our products and our policies in a way that serves youth communities in Africa and around the world. And on that note, of course, we are talking and discussing a number of points around the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had. And this is an impact that we have seen across different societies, and it has reflected on online and offline activities that we do. And it's quite unfortunate, really, that a lot of large global occurrences that happen, and COVID-19 has been one of them in particular, happens to have a disproportionate effect on youth. Which makes it only more and more important for us to bring youth into the conversation as we are today, to look more at what their inputs would be and what their topics of focus are in order for us to reshape our way forward. So to go back to your question on what exactly the role of the public policy team is at Twitter, our role is really to serve the public space and promote the health of the public conversation. So we are the connecting factor or the connecting element between civil society, regulatory bodies, and Twitter. And our job is therefore automatically to serve our people in all topics that are at interest to them and to us as a platform that is promoting health and promoting a digital space that allows people to share and connect ideas and information. So this can be topics that range from raising awareness on mis and disinformation to combating platform abuse, manipulation, hateful conduct, or any other abuses of Twitter as a platform, but also of the internet in general. So having said that, these are somewhat more specific topics that we discuss that are of interest to us as Twitter. However, we also have a broader role as a public policy team in representing our interests and our people's interests in topics that go beyond the platform. So that may be the open internet, which is a topic we're going to touch on as a recommendation to the forum as well, the principle of free expression, data privacy, user protection, and so on. So our role really goes beyond the platform, and it is to serve our people and to bring in the voice of youth into the service and into the messaging that we're sending out.
How do you see, Jawahir, more youth utilizing this opportunity? How can we amplify more voices of young people across the continent?
Sure, thank you for that. I believe the core response here would be trust and strong partnerships, which are two things that we continue to work on because this is a process that's never static, and there are always some struggles or changes to our environment that are going on around us and outside us that are really out of our control that we have to adapt to, not just as a platform but as a large digital space and community, and that is Twitter, that brings millions of people and serves billions of tweets and of conversations on a day-to-day basis. So the best way really to amplify more young African voices on the platform begins with creating strong partnerships, whether it be with brilliant individuals who we have on the conversation here today, or with large organizations who can be in civic space, who can be falling under partnerships within the United Nations, or even amongst governments, and even academic institutions that can all together help us contribute to topics that have become a priority and are increasingly becoming a priority, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic has hit. And we say that because we always say at Twitter that life pre-COVID-19 is not the same as that we are seeing post-COVID-19. Most of our day-to-day activities, including learning and working, which also involves youth, has been shifted to the digital space. So what are some of those topics or priorities that we think partnerships should focus on? We would say educating youth on online safety, educating youth as well and bringing their opinions in on how to foster tolerant conversations and healthy conversations on the platform, And this, of course, links to protecting minority groups on the digital space, since we have moved to it to a very large extent.
Thank you, Jawahir, and thank you again, Twitter, for being such a valued partner of not only this youth dialogue, but also the forum. And I hope that we can also continue this important discussion and broaden it using the hashtags AF Youth Dialogue and Aswan Forum. And again, I see the main theme of collaboration and partnership. And I'd like to take it back to Levi. Levi, you've addressed the role of government, you've talked about government, but given your extensive experience with empowering young people to be part of the solution to some of the most pressing health challenges that we face, and also your work promoting equality, such as gender equality in the African health sphere, I'd like to ask you again concretely, what is your message to young Africans who might be watching our dialogue? How can we empower them more or encourage them to use their talent and leadership to mitigate the effects of the pandemic and other health challenges that we are facing as a continent?
Soraya, yeah, that's the question of our time, right? I guess the first place where we start is by building capacity. So we understand that young people have enthusiasm, they have energy, they have innovation, they have curiosity, they have all these things that needs to be invested in further. And it needs to be intentional investments in youth-led and youth-serving organizations that allow young people to not just have a seat at the table, but also provide solutions to the problems that they face on a daily basis. The simple piece of advice that I usually give young leaders is, it's a colloquial quote by George Bernard Shaw, who said that reasonable people adapt themselves to the world. Unreasonable people adapt the world to themselves. And therefore, all human progress rely on people being unreasonable. So for me, it's really about how we encourage young leaders to be unreasonable about status quos, about policies and legislations and other infrastructure that isolate, that exclude, and that harm young people, and coming to the table with our solutions and how to improve on those policies, those legislations, and other architectures of oppression to ensure that we do leave no one behind. But it starts with that step.
Building on the common theme of partnership and collaboration, how do you see African youth and yourself capitalizing on some of the linkages that and opportunities to collaborate that have come out in this conversation to further strengthen the peace and security agenda on our continent?
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic question. I think we have an entry point from this inaugural forum dialogue to take some of these suggestions and these brilliant inputs and recommendations that have come out from fellow exquisite panelists, and maybe come up with a position statement or some sort of recommendation sheet that can go on to supplement the official outcome document of the forum. And we can use this then as a instrument for advocacy. We can lend our thought leadership and our imagination and some of our ideas in terms of what we envision an Africa that is built back better, that can be encapsulated into this document. So that would be my first recommendation. Let's not just have this talk shop, let's actually transcend this conversation into a credible document that can be passed on to His Excellency and other esteemed colleagues and leaders who support this youth agenda. So that would be
Thank you, Levi, and that is actually the plan.
This dialogue is just the first step. We definitely do plan on working on, collating some of the most important recommendations that you have in a document. And as I've said, the intention is to keep this dialogue going, not just only on Twitter, but also through other meetings and amplifying the recommendations that you have all shared. I'd also like to move back to Luther, because your initiative is a central meeting point for so many others. You've built essentially a platform for others who have ideas to start launching initiatives, leveraging entrepreneurship and innovation. So I wanted to ask you, where do you see the linkages that we as Africans can harness to further the peace and security agenda across the continent?
Yeah.
And what can other fellow Africans learn from your specific project?
Great. Thanks, Soraya. I think that's a great question. So as we mentioned earlier, with the pandemic forcing us to wind down on most of our programs, rethinking all of what we've done, this crisis really taught us the essence of building virtual communities to engage people despite the current development with COVID-19. And I think that the virtual community has really enabled us to increase, even the people who didn't follow up prior now can benefit from some of our programs and so forth. With all of what affected us, whether delay in funding, reduction in funding, in all of our revenue streams, I think there are a few things we think with our focus on youth can really keep us going. We think with our focus on youth, we should non-institutionalize it, because by definition, youth are more mobile, they can move to where possible openings for change exist. And because of that, we think we can build on their agility and ability to take risks in order to generate new ways of supporting the change at the right moments. We think there are entrenched systems as well. So youth are often, marginalized through these systems that we have set up on equal decision-making structures in Liberia and in Africa. So we feel that these youth, when we leverage their potential, their agility, we can really create systems that they will have the tools, the knowledge and resources they need to create the world or the country they would like to live in. And then finally, with Liberia unique population, where we have about 60% of the population now under the age of 35 and the median age is 18, we feel that there's an imperative to really engage this group in building systems that work. So everything that we are doing here at iCampus and that we like to share with our counterparts and colleagues is really, we will see success despite the COVID-19. We'll see success when we see new initiatives being led by young people that are pushing for change, when we see collaboration among different groups of young people towards shared goals, when we see greater engagement among young people in solution to the challenges they face. And more people coming to the space here to really use it and push for change, whether they're entrepreneurs, they're social change agents, they're digital agents. We believe that with our networks we have with the AfriLabs, for example, which is the conglomeration of African tech hubs, and also with our network we have with the Open Gulf Hub in Washington, D.C., we can enable these youth through digital means to be able to, not just learn from other people there, but also share their ideas with their counterparts in Africa, in DC and other places, because we believe that sometimes the conversation happening on the larger stages at the UN, at the OGP or other, global stages that they're talking about, moving Africa forward, the real doers and takers that are, fighting for these change in these countries and the continent, they are based right here. So we believe that when they can have conversation and share their knowledge and learn from others across the world, we can have more and more knowledge to move Liberia and Africa forward.
We are doers, and we have so much opportunity to leverage on technologies such as the one enabling us to meet virtually, to create, virtual projects across different countries. And I think there are limitless possibilities, and each and every one of you has shown that we can, because we are doers and because we've got African leaders such as yourself who are stepping up and embracing the opportunities that also come with challenges such as the pandemic. I'd like to also move on to Elizabeth, because you have shown a lot of leadership and you've had your work recognized internationally. We've talked about you also finding ways to adapt to the pandemic and the challenges that you've personally faced in your advocacy and the work you do. But I also like to build on this and ask you the same question. When it comes to the underlying theme of collaboration, how do you see us leveraging, a lot of these ideas that we have just come out and the partnership opportunities to further the continent's peace and security agenda?
Thank you so much. I think one of the most important things is to ask ourselves how we also assist the stakeholders that we're talking about in this collaboration and partnership. And of course, looking at the fact that young people still stand to be the most adversely affected and impacted by both the climate and ecological crisis and also the COVID-19 pandemic, then I think one of the things we need to do is to tap into the power of young people and focus on this by raising their voices and empowering them to showcase their work through this partnership and collaboration. And then the other thing we would focus on is to increase their participation, because I do believe that young people do deserve the chance to have a meaningful say on the negotiations which are shaping their future. And that's why it was also really important to have this conversation today as young people are from across the continent. And the other thing is, how do we also focus on finding resources for young people who are trying to champion and find solutions for these challenges? Because despite the fact that they are at the center of the challenges, they are working on solutions every day. And for instance, in Africa, I know so many young people are focusing on protecting, restoring, preserving, and also finding a way to sustainably manage our ecosystems, because our ecosystems need us right now. So how do we make sure that we also finance towards, for example, nature-based solutions? Because all of these issues are interlinked. And I think also looking towards aspects like the COP26, we should be focusing on looking at outcomes. For example, how do we invest in nature's ability to address climate change? And how do we even focus and make sure that everyone is being part of the solution, and it's not just a few people that are working on solutions, but everyone is actually doing their fair share in terms of what is expected of them. And I believe that is going to really be, it's going to be helpful for everyone. And of course, also to young people, our response to COVID-19 pandemic has taught us like very key lessons. We've addressed this pandemic in a swift way. We have had drastic measures, nations being locked down, and a lot of things that we have not seen before. But when it comes to other crises like the climate crisis, we don't see the same swift actions happening. It's like the climate crisis is not a crisis, and which is not the case, because it should be treated as one. And it's important that we recognize that these challenges are affecting everyone. And just because it's not affecting you from where you are, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. There are people who are facing the impacts directly each and every day. And of course, it's about time to embrace partnerships, collaborations, to make sure that we focus on all of these issues at the same time. None of the issues should be left on the side. All the issues should be put on the forefront, and then we focus on them to ensure that we secure this planet for the next generations to come.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's very important to leave no one behind and to recognize that we might not be immediately affected by some of the climate challenges that we face on the continent right this moment, but we will in the future, because our continent's challenges affect each and every one of us, regardless of the proportion. And we are united in wanting to move our continent forward. So I thank you very much for emphasizing this very important point. And I'd also, since we're talking a lot about peace and security and how we can leverage linkages and opportunities for collaboration to further this agenda, I'd like to ask Cassie specifically if you can concretely give me some of the ideas that you have based on your experience on how we can further the peace and security agenda through the active involvement of Africa's youth and partnerships.
Thank you, Soraya. I think that one of my experience shows me or taught me that celebrating peace efforts should make more noise than talking about war. And I think that new technologies and social medias and older, it's a way for us to celebrate all the work, to showcase all the work that young people is doing, around Africa, around peace and security agenda. Because we have a challenge, we have to challenge the narrative that, that the way the world sees us as African, as young African, And I think that, using the new technologies is a way, as I mentioned, as I said, like to really shows what young people are doing, the Africa that we want and that we are building actually, that even though we're not around the table, we are doing things in community. It's also a huge and important opportunity for us to connect to each other, to build peace around Africa. And our contribution as young people is really the fact that there's a lack of connection between young people in Africa. And I think that, using new technology to really try to reconnect each other and to really go back to our values as one Africa is not, it's not important like to be Pan-Africanist, or it's not about that. It's about like really challenging the narrative on how the world see us and the work that young people is doing. Pictures, I'm from a country where when you go on Google, for instance, I use the example of Central African Republic to really show the importance of how we can really use new technology in terms of peace and in peace building in Africa. I'm from Central African Republic, and when you go on Google, and you can do it if you have time, when you type Central African Republic, you will see, you go on Google image and you will find the worst thing ever on that country. But this is not the story of my country, actually. This is not how I live my country. This is not how I see my country. And the work that we are doing, when you ask me to give you a concrete example, is that now we are trying to get a lot of pictures, videos, and really put a lot of the elements on the internet to show what we are doing in the country. And I think it's something that young people in Africa can use, as my fellows just mentioned here. It's like it's possible for us to really play a role, like by just shifting, beyond the speech, the remarks, and all the things that we can do. I think that pictures and videos and that kind of element can completely shift also the way we think peace, we think the present, but also think the future.
And I'm so grateful, Cassie, that you brought this important point, because it links to the recommendations that came out of the Aswan Forum last year. And I think the ambassador and myself, we've talked about this early on in this discussion about shifting the paradigm and also shifting the narrative that Africa has ample opportunities through its youth, through its talent, and that we can shift the idea that Africa can actually move forward further towards achieving its potential and also towards recovery and resilience. So I want to thank you very much for that, and thank you again for emphasizing the importance of using technology to amplify not only voices but also stories, and especially success stories that come out of our continent. And to that effect, I'd also like to ask Jawahir, and it's good to have the perspective of someone outside the continent, because I'm a fellow African, so I'm a little bit biased, and I'm very hopeful when it comes to the continent's future, when I see that I have fellow Africans like you who are working so hard on different areas that impact us all. So I'm grateful that we have also this external perspective. I wanted to ask you, Jawahir, about how we can leverage platforms like Twitter further, while also ensuring everyone's safety on the platform, because there's been a lot of discussion that with the pandemic, a lot of us have been spending more time online, yet we have to also acknowledge that not everyone has access to the internet. And at the same time, these long periods spent online also come with certain risks that the platforms are not always safe for everyone. So how can we ensure that we can leverage this technology while ensuring safety?
Of course, thank you, Surya, for that question. And actually, the topic of access to the internet is a very important point here, because it takes us to one of our major recommendations for the forum that we've put together for this conversation, which is actually advocating for the open internet. And this is a number one priority to us as a Twitter public policy team for the year 2021. And it really plays well into the conversation, as fellow panelists have already discussed a number of times, the importance of technology, the importance of different mediums and technology in helping youth contribute to different strategies towards rebuilding and helping or assisting in the recovery of Africa. So of course, advocating for the open internet is a very important point to mention here. And the open internet can just to put it into a simple definition, is the principle or the concept of making the internet freely, equally available and accessible to all citizens in order for them to be able to express themselves freely, to engage and inquire in the World Wide Web as we all do, to ensure that there is a concept of net neutrality, that we all have equal access to the internet in different times, in different regions, different areas of the world. This concept, of course, has become a priority to us because we believe that it plays a major role in the healthy development of modern societies, whether it be in Africa or outside of Africa. It has proven to be one of the basic architectural or infrastructure that is needed in order for us to bridge the digital divide that may exist. And bridging that digital divide will, of course, have a notable positive impact on shaping Africa's new normal, which we see is also a contribution to the world's new normal. When we empower people in Africa with open, free, and secure access to the public space that fosters the largest amount of exchange of ideas and information across the world, we allow for that change to happen in a healthier and faster manner. And of course, we allow expertise from all around the world to flow in and out of Africa in a manner that serves that purpose. So whether it was from topics of the COVID-19 pandemic to civic processes, climate change, entrepreneurship, all of the topics that fellow panelists have discussed today actually have outcomes that can reach farther with an open internet, which is why we call on hosts, on partners, and participants to help us in advocating this in their different fields of expertise. Now, to touch on the topic of safety, we, using trust and strong partnerships, have worked with different organizations across the region and across the world to ensure that there are necessary trainings for large groups of youth in different societies and different countries. And we have done this in a continuous manner, whether it was during the COVID-19 pandemic or before or after that period as well. And one of our largest global partnerships that focus on that for youth in particular is our existing global partnership with UNESCO, where we worked very closely, our public policy team and the UNESCO team, on building a handbook that allows youth and even children who are using the internet more commonly these days to learn how to become digital citizens of the internet and to learn how to acquire skills of media information literacy, which will help them filter through the massive amounts of information that they can come across online, some of which could be misleading, misguiding. There's a lot of mis and disinformation as well. So this is one of many partnerships that we are, of course, proud of. And we call on our partners and participants who are listening to, of course, approach us with their ideas, and we are open again for feedback, for more partnerships, and to support partnerships that are already being built elsewhere in the region as well. And on that note, and to close on the topic of safety as well, we have to make our policies and our rules more understandable to the youth and to the public as a whole. We actually refreshed our policies to make them shorter, more concise, and understandable. And we have put ourselves to the limit that we give to our people on the platform. So we have limited every rule to 280 characters to make sure this is easy and concise and can be understood by any user on the platform, including youth, of course. And we continue to refresh our policies in a manner that takes into consideration the changes we see in our environment. So we have new policies on the COVID-19 pandemic and what is and is not allowed on the platform around that conversation. And of course, are also continuously updating our hateful conduct policy, which recently has added dehumanization against any race, gender, nationality, disease, any kind of racism or discrimination amongst those categories, has a zero tolerance policy on the platform.
Thank you so much, Jawahir, and thank you, Twitter, for not only partnering on this session, but also partnering with the forum. And in conclusion, I'd like to move on to our 4 African leaders. Thank you all for joining us. If I could ask you in just a couple of seconds to look at the camera and just give one brief message to your fellow young Africans on the forum. I'll start with Levi. Levi? Okay, until you're ready, I will start with Cassie. The floor is yours. Just a quick couple of second message.
Okay. My people, I would like to tell you that we are the present, but we are also the future, actually. But I believe that we have the capacity, if we come together and we try to get connected to each other, we can transform Africa. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And moving on to Luther, a quick 2-second message, please.
My fellow young leaders, we are Africans. I believe we have the power, we have the energy and resources to move Africa forward. So as you convene, let's continue to share ideas. Let's continue to learn from one another. Let's continue to network so that we create the Africa we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Luther. We can each and every one of us has a role to create the Africa that we want to see. I'm going to be stealing that quote. Thank you so much. Moving on to Elizabeth. Your quick message, please.
Thank you so much. To my fellow young Africans, we must begin to see ourselves as solution providers and begin to take every action that it takes to create a livable world and a safe future for ourselves. And we must not remain silent. We must keep taking on courageous leadership for the sake of our future.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And we also speak up by having such dialogues, which we hope to continue on Twitter, as I was saying. Levi, you are the final person. Last but not least, a quick message from you, please.
Sorry, my connectivity was a bit wonky earlier. Stand up, be counted, take up space, speak your truth, and be unreasonable with all status quos which exclude young people and disadvantaged and oppressed people.
I'd like to thank you all very, very much for being part of this important dialogue, which I hope we can resume, as I said, on Twitter. The hashtag is AF Youth Dialogue and Aswan Forum. Thank you, Ambassador Abdel Latif, for hosting us and for your personal commitment to empowering our youth to tackle the peace and security agenda on our continent.